Everyone and their dog claims to be anti-imperialist these days, but while the term is often used interchangeably with colonialism, expansionism and militarism, when Marxists talk about imperialism, we're referring to something else. Now that something else will generally include colonialism, expansionism and militarism, but these are only secondary aspects of it. When Marxists talk about imperialism, we're talking primarily about an economic mechanism. Now this economic imperialism may necessitate war, or it may take place peacefully. It may utilise colonialism and expansionism, or it may find alternative, more efficient ways of being carried out. To delineate this Marxist conception of imperialism from earlier forms of imperialism, such as that seen with the Roman Empire, we can refer to this modern phenomenon as capitalist imperialism or monopoly capitalism. Right, so now that we've clarified what it's not, let's talk about what exactly capitalist imperialism is. Welcome to Socialism 101, a series designed to help educate people with no prior knowledge on the basics of socialism and communism from an ML and MLM perspective with short and easily digestible videos. If this sounds interesting to you, then go ahead and hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell below. If you'd like to support Marxist educational content, then toss €1 or $1 per month over on Patreon to help keep this series going. If you're not in a position to support financially, you can help out a lot by just sharing these videos around on social media. Capitalist imperialism, or monopoly capitalism, refers to the stage of capitalism that occurs after industrial capitalism, which emerged at the beginning of the 20th century and continues to this day. At this stage, free competition among capitalists has led to a concentration of production and capital which has given way to monopolies that now play a decisive role in economic life. Industrial capital becomes merged with bank capital, creating what's known as finance capital. Those who wield this finance capital, controlling both industry and the banks, merge with the bourgeois government and come to form a financial oligarchy. Rather than just commodities being exported, now capital itself is exported around the world. This export of capital, as opposed to export of commodities, makes less developed countries dependent on the imperialist powers. International monopolist capitalist associations are formed in order to share out the world among themselves and divvy up the loot globally. And finally, territorial division of the entire world between the great capitalist imperialist powers is completed. Lenin summarises this by stating that imperialism is capitalism at that stage of development at which the dominance of monopolies and finance capital is established, in which the export of capital has acquired pronounced importance, in which the division of the world among the international trusts has begun, in which the division of all territories of the globe among the biggest capitalist powers has been completed. Now there's a lot to unpack there, so let's take a deeper look at each of these aspects of monopoly capitalism one by one. Monopolies are the cornerstone of capitalist imperialism. Furthermore, these monopolies are an inevitable outgrowth of capitalism. As capitalists appropriate the unpaid labour of workers through wage labour to realise their profits, they reinvest a portion of those profits in more commodities, means of production and labour power, and accumulate further capital. As this process repeats itself, the enterprise grows and freely competes with other enterprises doing the same thing. In the process of this competition, smaller capitalists with fewer workers are driven out of the market by larger capitalists with more workers through various means, including mergers and acquisitions, patents and copyrights, predatory pricing, and so on. Consequently, capital becomes concentrated into fewer and fewer hands as a large number of small businesses becomes a small number of large businesses. This small number of large businesses then forms cartels, trusts and syndicates with one another in order to reduce outside competition and maximise profits between them. Cartels come to an agreement on the terms of sale, dates of payment and so on. They divide the markets among themselves. They fix the quantity of goods to be produced. They fix prices. They divide the profits among the various enterprises and so on. So at a certain point in the development of capitalism, the free market and its open competition becomes its polar opposite, monopoly, or more commonly today, oligopoly. A small group of enterprises controls everything, and these monopolies or oligopolies come to play a decisive role in the economy. This is extremely apparent today where we see prominent monopolies in the tech industry, food and agribusiness, pharmaceuticals, retail, manufacturing, the media and so on. In fact, a close network of just 147 companies controls over 40% of total corporate assets globally. However, industrial capitalists wouldn't get far without the banks. As capitalism develops, the monopoly capital of industry and the banks grow more and more intertwined, eventually becoming virtually indistinguishable. This merging of monopoly industrial capital and monopoly banking capital becomes what's known as finance capital. And the monopolists who wield this finance capital become what's known as the financial oligarchy. But how does this merging between the capital of industry and the banks occur? As banking develops and becomes concentrated in a small number of establishments, the banks grow from modest middlemen into powerful monopolies, having at their command almost the whole of the money capital of all the capitalists and small businessmen, and also the larger part of the means of production and sources of raw material in any one country and in a number of countries. So the banks find themselves handling huge amounts of industrial capital, and by managing the current accounts of these enterprises, the banks develop thorough knowledge of the enterprises' holdings and larger economic positions, making the industrialists dependent on the banks. But not only do banks simply hold or even control the money capital of the industrialists, more and more they too become directly invested in industry themselves, sinking enormous sums of their own funds into industry to be employed by the industrialists. More and more, the monopoly industrialists and the monopoly bankers become the very same people. A personal link-up, so to speak, is established between the banks and the biggest industrial and commercial enterprises. The merging of one with another through the acquisition of shares, through the appointment of bank directors to the supervisory boards or boards of directors of industrial and commercial enterprises, and vice versa. The personal link-up between the banks and industry is supplemented by the personal link-up between both of them and the government. Wielding monopolised industry on one hand and monopolised banking in the other, the financial oligarchy comes to dominate all areas of society at the highest stage of capitalism with their finance capital. Now, the domination of finance capital isn't limited to the confines of national boundaries. In fact, already in the 1848 Communist Manifesto during the period of industrial capitalism, Marx and Engels had noted that the need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the entire surface of the globe. It must nestle everywhere, settle everywhere, establish connections everywhere. Seeking infinite maximal growth, impossible especially within the narrow confines of national boundaries, capital expands internationally into every corner of the world in order to realise super profits. This is facilitated by the export of finance capital backed by industry and the banks of the imperial core around the globe. Importantly, this is not simply the export of commodities or goods. Typical of the old capitalism, when free competition held undivided sway, was the export of goods. Typical of the latest stage of capitalism, when monopolies rule, is the export of capital. As opposed to basic international trade, export of capital would instead include extractive endeavours like giving out loans around the world in order to make money from interest, setting up companies in countries where labour power can be purchased more cheaply, facilitating the super exploitation of labour and corresponding super profits, and a whole range of other forms of outward foreign direct investment which develop relations of dependence internationally upon the imperialist powers. A typical example of the export of capital that we can see regularly today would be imperialist powers buying up mines in underdeveloped countries and then sending the raw materials and wealth generated from this back to the imperial core. Through these ways and more, the financial oligarchy continues to loot and plunder the world. Now, similarly to how cartels, trusts and syndicates are set up to monopolise and manage affairs locally, at the stage of imperialism we also see the development of international monopolist capitalist associations to manage these monopolies at the global level. Prominent examples of international monopolist capitalist associations today would include the United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund and the World Trade Organization. While most countries in the world are part of these associations, imperialist powers like the United States and the United Kingdom monopolise these institutions through various means. Generally, by contributing the most financially to these institutions and having the largest holdings, the imperialist powers hold the largest share of the voting rights, which they can then use to force their preferred policies upon the oppressed nations. We see this concretely, for example, with the IMF and the World Bank, wherein the United States alone holds over 17% of the voting rights for each. We can also point to the European Union as an international monopolist capitalist association, today primarily dominated by the imperialist alliance of Germany and France. Lastly, the stage of monopoly capitalism is characterised by the completion of the territorial division of every corner of the world and potentially redivision beyond this. When Lenin was writing Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism in 1916, this referred primarily to territorial division by the process of colonialism. The world had just witnessed the scramble for Africa of the late 19th century, wherein Western European powers carved up and dished out almost the entire African continent among themselves, locking down their spheres of influence. However, the direct political control of colonialism would often provoke armed rebellion against the imperialists. So over the course of the 20th century, the imperialist powers instead moved towards embracing neo-colonialism. With neo-colonialism, countries could be nominally independent politically, but economically these countries would continue to be dominated by and dependent upon the imperialist powers. We see this situation in numerous former colonies around the world, which have now become semi-colonies. So when we talk about the territorial division of the world today, we're primarily referring to the spheres of influence that are maintained with neo-colonialism, though some full colonies do still remain. Unlike with direct colonialism, where a colony would be dominated primarily by one imperialist power, neo-colonialism permits multiple imperialist powers to exploit particular semi-colonies simultaneously. A country that was once a British colony may now be a semi-colony of Britain, the United States and Germany, with each of these imperialist powers working together in concert to super-exploit the semi-colony and parasitically funnel wealth and resources back to their respective imperialist cores. Today we've taken a look at the defining features of the highest stage of capitalism, capitalist imperialism. First, as a result of the concentration and centralization of capital, free competition is eliminated and monopolies now dominate and play a decisive role in economic life. Second, through the merging of industrial and banking capital, finance capital is created. The monopolists who wield this finance capital, the financial oligarchy, come to dominate and play decisive roles in all aspects of society. Third, this finance capital is exported beyond national boundaries into every corner of the world in pursuit of super profits, which are then sent back to the imperial core. Fourth, international monopolist capitalist associations are formed in order to divide up and manage the spheres of influence of the imperialist powers. And fifth, the entirety of the world is territorially divided by these imperialist powers, formerly through colonialism and now through neo-colonialism. This is the Marxist understanding of capitalist imperialism. To dive deeper into this subject, make sure to have a read of Lenin's pamphlet Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. It's relatively short and written in very accessible language, so it should be easy enough. If you're struggling to understand the concentration and centralization of capital that leads to monopolies, this process is explained in Chapter 25, Section 2 of Karl Marx's Capital Volume 1. For more on the 20th century transition from imperialist reliance on colonies to imperialist reliance on semi-colonies, read Kwame Nkrumah's Neo-Colonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. For more on how monopoly capitalism functions today globally, particularly regarding how imperialist countries monopolise international institutions, have a read of International Institutional Monopoly Capitalism and its Manifestations by Vu Man Kwong on Monthly Review Online. Each of these resources and more are linked in the description box below. Right, thanks very much for watching this video. Hopefully you found it useful in one way or another. Thanks especially to the supporters on Patreon who've made this possible. Thank you Southern Comrade, Ian McShay, Ugopnik, Ian Snyder, Jacob Jaff, Borku Gorilla, Ryan Hodgson, Soup, Madeline, Sonic232, Sagan, Michaela Schmid, Christian Nepales, Alfonso Dingo Torres, Mekalova, Rock Artist, Greengree, Todd Sprang, Nika the Sage, Zakasi, Anglo-Irish Bolshevik, Amy Schmidt, Eli Leslie, Thomas Ross and Mudd, Jason Schmidt, Del Seabolt, Trainage 13, Mitch Schiller, Saoirse Ní Bhealán, Roja, MLM in Practice, Brian Ruse, Eric Lindahl, ZK Goody, Kyle Rapp, Robert Charzak, Doc Toma, Oyo Pera, Becky, Pastor Schubert, Mr. Miyamoto, Kyle King, Reverend Lon Nom Hollywood, Wonderbad, JT Chapman, Jose, Joseph Shepard, Jack Schneidman, Comrade Amara, Wealth for the 99%, Spoop and Trailer Park Communists. Cheers everyone, agus slán go fóill.